All right, listen up, because something really interesting is happening, kind of quietly bubbling up under the surface of, well, American habits. For decades, alcohol has been king, right? America's most widely used drug. But now there's this challenger emerging, not with a big bang, but sort of a subtle shift in what people are doing daily. We are talking about THC-infused beverages. Now, I've got this fascinating stack of sources here looking into why these drinks are suddenly popping up everywhere. And the big question, can they really shake up the massive alcohol industry? So that's our mission for this deep dive. Let's unpack the what, the why, and maybe the so what of this whole category. We'll try to connect the dots, from what consumers want to these weird regulatory loopholes and even what the big companies are doing.
It's absolutely true. That quiet shift you mentioned, it's actually pretty seismic when you look closer. For the first time in over 4 decades, we're seeing reports, data is suggesting daily cannabis use has actually overtaken daily alcohol use in the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah. It's not just a blip. It feels like a real foundational change in habits, which, really sets the stage for talking about these drinks.
Okay, so let's start with basics just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Cannabis, marijuana, it's a plant, right?
Okay.
And it has these compounds, cannabinoids.
Correct. And the two main ones people hear about are THC, that's delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol.
The one that gets you high.
That's the one. And then there's CBD, cannabidiol, which doesn't have that intoxicating effect. And these compounds, they interact with receptors in your brain. That's how they can sometimes, help with things like pain or nausea or anxiety for some people.
And the market seems to be catching on incredibly fast. I mean, we're seeing figures like in some retail markets, these drinks make up around 15% of total sales already.
15%, yeah. It's significant.
Well, it really makes you wonder, why? Why are they catching on so fast? What's the appeal here?
Well, a big part of it seems to be this shift in what consumers want, especially younger Americans. There's definitely a growing health consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
People are looking for alternatives that don't come with a hangover.
Right. The dreaded morning after.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So these THC drinks, they're often pitched as offering this sort of mellow buzz, enough to loosen up socially, but not wreck your next day.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the format is appealing. Many are like fruity seltzers, zero-calorie carbonated water.
Mm-hmm.
It feels modern, maybe healthier.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also seeing this trend, people calling it smoker to sipper.
Smoker to sipper.
Yeah, people who maybe smoked cannabis before, but they're looking for something cleaner or maybe just more discreet than lighting up. Drinking is just easier in some situations.
That makes sense.
And the numbers back it up. The global market for just THC seltzer was around, $340 million a couple of years back. Projections are showing it could hit nearly $2 billion by 2030.
$2 billion. That's serious growth. Which brings up that confusing point you hear a lot. If it's cannabis, how is it legal in liquor stores? Especially in states where marijuana itself is still illegal, recreationally, or even medically. Okay, let's unpack this part.
Yeah, this is where it gets legally interesting, let's say. You have to remember, federally, marijuana is still a Schedule I controlled substance.
Heroin.
Same category, yeah. Which made things incredibly messy for businesses for years.
Yeah.
No federal tax breaks, banks were hesitant, investors were wary. Just difficult.
Right.
But then came the 2018 Farm Bill. That was the turning point. It legalized hemp and products derived from hemp, including cannabinoids like THC, if they contain no more than 0.3% THC by dry weight.
0.3%. Seems tiny.
It does sound tiny.
Okay.
But here's the loophole.
Oh, the loophole.
That 0.3% limit, it applies to the hemp plant itself by dry weight.
So beverage makers figured out they could legally extract THC from this legal hemp.
Instead of marijuana. Exactly. And then they could put that hemp-derived THC into drinks, because the final drink wasn't subject to that same 0.3% dry weight rule in the same way.
Whoa. Okay, so they could concentrate it.
They could use enough hemp extract to get a significant dose of THC into a can or bottle, while the original source material met the federal definition of legal hemp.
That's incredibly clever. And it basically sidestepped state marijuana laws.
Completely.
Huh.
It meant these products weren't restricted to state-licensed dispensaries. They could show up in regular stores, liquor stores, convenience stores, online. Anywhere, really.
That explains the silver boom then. It wasn't just demand, it was this regulatory opening.
Precisely. A sort of shadow market opened up, thriving in this gray area.
Okay, so with that momentum, that clever workaround, we get to the really big question. Can these THC drinks actually displace alcohol? I mean, you see some signs pointing that way, maybe. Beer and wine sales dipped, about 5% since 2023?
Yeah, there have been some dips.
And at the same time, non-alcoholic drinks and these functional beverages, including THC ones, are climbing. So what does it all mean for booze? Is the party ending for traditional alcohol, or are there still big hurdles?
It's definitely not that simple. There's some major complexities, some real challenges for these THC drinks.
Like what?
Well, first off, dosage and regulation, that 0.3% rule we talked about
Yeah.
for the raw hemp.
Yeah.
It doesn't directly regulate the total THC in the final drink. So companies can, perfectly legally, under this interpretation, pack in way more THC than you might expect. Some states that do regulate cannabis edibles, like Colorado, they might cap a single dose at 10 milligrams.
Okay.
But we're seeing THC seltzers out there with 30 milligrams per can. We're seeing little 60 milligram shots with 100 milligrams.
100 milligrams? That's a lot. That's not a mellow buzz for most people.
Not at all. And it highlights this kind of Wild West situation. There's no federal standard for finished product dosage like there is for alcohol content.
So it's unpredictable for consumers.
Very. And it's risky for the businesses, too. What if states suddenly decide to crack down, regulate dosage, close that hemp loophole specifically for beverages?
Right, the rug could get pulled out from under them.
Exactly. That regulatory uncertainty makes scaling up investing big money really tricky. It's a legal gray area, fundamentally.
Okay, regulation is one hurdle. What else?
Then there's the whole healthier image.
Yes. The idea that sipping is better than smoking.
Right. And while maybe it feels cleaner, it doesn't automatically make it healthy, does it? There's still a lack of public awareness about effects, dosages,
Yeah.
and especially the danger of mixing these drinks with alcohol. That can seriously amplify the effects of both.
That sounds risky.
It is. And little things people might not know, like THC often hits harder if you drink it after eating a meal.
Really? Didn't know that.
Yeah. So bottom line, THC is THC. Drinking it versus smoking it changes the delivery method, maybe the onset time, but the substance and its potential health considerations, those remain. The perception of health might be running ahead of the science here.
Perception versus reality. Got it. Any other big roadblocks?
Cost. Definitely cost.
Right, they seem expensive.
They really are. A 6-pack of THC seltzer, it could easily cost you $30, maybe more.
$30 compared to what, like $10, $15 for a craft beer 6-pack? Less for standard beer?
Exactly. We're talking maybe 6 times more expensive than a regular beer 6-pack on average.
Wow.
And that's not just because it's premium. It's because this is still a new industry. They don't have the massive economies of scale, the super efficient distribution networks that alcohol has built over decades. There's more friction, more cost involved in operating in this legally complex space. For a lot of consumers, that price difference is just too much to switch, no matter how curious they are.
Okay, so regulation uncertainty, health perception issues, and a big cost barrier. Given all of that, it does sound like the idea of THC drinks totally replacing alcohol anytime soon is, well, maybe a bit far-fetched right now.
As things stand today. Yeah, far-fetched is probably fair. The hurdles are significant.
But you have to wonder, what about the big players? The alcohol companies themselves, are they just watching this happen? Or are they getting involved?
That's the really interesting strategic angle here.
Okay.
They are not ignoring it, not at all. Some of the biggest alcohol companies are actively hedging their bets. They're investing heavily in cannabis companies or even launching their own cannabis beverage lines.
Really? Like who?
Well, a major example is Constellation Brands. They make Corona beer, Modelo, huge beer importer.
Okay. No.
They invested something like $5 billion in Canopy Growth, which is a major Canadian cannabis company. And a big part of that was explicitly about developing THC beverages for the future market.
$5 billion. That's not pocket change. That's a serious bet.
It's a massive bet. And what it does is it gives these big companies a safety net, If the legal landscape keeps shifting toward cannabis, toward these beverages, they're already positioned. They have a stake in the game. And if, on the other hand, regulators decide to clamp down on the current loopholes, these big companies have the financial strength, the diverse portfolios, to just adapt. They can weather that storm much better than a small, independent THC drink startup.
So it's strategic positioning for whatever happens next. Less about direct competition now, more about future-proofing.
Exactly. It's about having options, having the muscle to pivot no matter which way the regulations or consumer trends go. Small players just don't have that luxury.
Okay, so wrapping this up. It's clear the buzz around these cannabis beverages is real. It's driven by changing tastes, especially younger people looking for alternatives. And let's be honest, by this very clever legal loophole that kind of blew the market open.
Definitely.
That path to actually dominating, to really knocking alcohol off its perch, it's still full of obstacles. Big ones. Regulation, health questions, cost.
Absolutely. connecting it all. The future of these THC drinks really seems to hang on how lawmakers and regulators respond next. Do they formalize it? Do they restrict it? That's the multi-billion-dollar question.
Yeah.
But displacing alcohol entirely, that remains a very, very high hurdle to clear, despite these interesting shifts we're seeing.
So thinking about this whole fascinating story, how consumers are changing, how industry is innovating, sometimes around the rules, what does this deep dive suggest to you about maybe the bigger picture, the future of mind-altering substances generally, public health policy in the U.S.? What questions does this raise for you about innovation, regulation, and even just personal choice in this really fast-changing market?